Hello and welcome again to the Q&A podcast. I am as always joined by Farooq.
Hey everyone, it's been a while.
And also as always I am A. So Q, as we've been off a month or two now, so I think a lot of the world has got on fire in the meanwhile. What are your kind of
burning.
It's definitely on fire. Not even discounting the fact we're quite literally witnessing in real time the genocide of the Palestinian people by the Israeli forces. We are also facing tons of local issues within the country of Pakistan, and we hoped that today we would kind of delve into trying to unravel the knot, so to say, around those issues.
Yeah, it's been tough. We've been going to protests for Gaza, doing what little we can, but it all seems so hopeless and feels really too much. Hundreds and thousands of people turn up and the policy doesn't change.
Exactly.
The least we can do is figure out what's going on, I guess.
I mean, that's probably the minimum we could probably do at this moment right now, because I understand, from my understanding and from my, I guess, life experience, you could say, the Gaza conflict, or so to say, or the Gaza situation was kind of what turned me towards understanding that politics is actually a very real force in the world, and also the fact that it was kind of the first stepping stone that kind of made me understand that the world doesn't really operate in the way that we think or seem to understand it does. And also not to acknowledge statements given directly by the state, you could say. Not to fully, I guess, give into state narratives, or to not fully 100% trust mainstream media, or always take it with a grain of salt, so to say. Because the Gaza conflict, I guess, in 2014 was kind of what started my journey into understanding politics in general, and also informing the current views that I hold today. So that's why I guess this is a very important, I guess, episode for me today. And
I feel you, especially because once you go out there and yell at people and still they don't stop massacring innocent civilians, you start to realize how little power you have. And I think that's the first step to realizing how you can get some power back.
Exactly. Right? I mean, it's definitely 100% in that direction, that it's understanding your own hopelessness in the situation and trying to enforce change on the world, that you understand that what things need to change in order for your voice to matter more in the greater scope of things. And that's kind of what we're going to try to do today, to help you guys make sense of propaganda, how it manifests, and how it's one of the facets of the series that I'm probably going to go deeper into, of the politics of oppression. And today we're going to go take a closer look, I guess, into how propaganda operates, be it from a state narrative, be it from mainstream media, be it from even talking heads like us. Propaganda is ever present and everywhere, in the same way that advertisements are. Trying to make sense of the world and try to understand what's actually going on to reach the truth of the matter. This is what we're going to try and help you unravel today.
Let's go.
So, outlining a couple of things in advance, I guess, we're going to go into the steps of how propaganda operates, and also how it's used to sell a certain narrative towards, you could say, generating outgroups. How is it focused towards certain individuals and groups versus scapegoating, and also making sure that their own shortcomings aren't so prescient to other people, and trying to muddy the waters so that people don't really understand which side they should be on in the greater scheme of things. For example, in the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, you can see it's very the waters have been muddied beyond recognition. For some people, it's a very clear-cut issue where they understand from their point of view that the Palestinian people are being systematically eradicated from the face of the earth. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, you can have Israeli Jewish people, and also you can have the larger Western world, for example, which considers the Palestinians and Hamas to be a huge threat towards the Israeli state. And these two sides of the world are kind of tugging against each other and trying to manipulate the way that the people who reside within those regions see the conflict for what it actually is, which is unequivocally a genocide. So
yeah, and I think all of us have seen how the seemingly independent media suddenly switched to towing the same line and not asking any questions when it comes to Israel.
it feels all of a sudden, but then you have to kind of understand that this has always been the status quo of the situation. That like
Yeah.
most of the Western world has supported Israel, and also it's in its formation, in its I guess base foundations, you could say, has supported the existence of a predominantly Zionist project, which has been a Zionist project since its inception, and it's like a modern example of, you could say, colonialism taking place. Like in a modern interpretation of colonialism, you could say it's like a old school version of colonialism. With not only with the Palestinian genocide, you could say that we're also facing a Baloch genocide within the borders of our own country in Pakistan, and also the expulsion of Afghan refugees from within Pakistan's borders as well. For now, you won't see the parallels that these two situations kind of have going on, but I hopefully by the end of this podcast you'll have a better understanding of what's going on within the country and how it kind of parallels narratives both in throughout history and also currently within using the Israeli state as kind of an example point. Since I think, in my opinion, it's much more easier to understand propaganda and also to understand how outgrouping essentially functions from the point of view of history, and also from the point of view from an outsider to some other country's propaganda. Because seeing propaganda within your own, I guess, fishbowl, so to say, is like you are a fish in that water, and you won't be able to understand that what you're seeing and hearing is actually propaganda. But versus seeing someone else's propaganda messaging, you can kind of clearly see the lines more clearly drawn there. And also with the failings of the Israeli state of trying to cover for their own, I guess, miscomings so far within the conflict, they've become very fraught in their propaganda messaging. So it's much more easier to understand from that point of view. So we'll move on to, I guess, the first point, which is the generation of an outgroup. In most propaganda generation, it's focused towards a certain group of people. These people could be racially diverse from you. They could have religious values which are diverse from you. They could have different sexual concepts. They could have different ideologies which differ from one person to another. The thing is that very small differences, or very fine or hair-splitting differences between two people or two groups of people, this is where propaganda kind of finds its way in and forces a wedge between two of either the same people or people who are originally aligned with one another and now are operating in counterpoint to one another. It kind of generates like an us versus them kind of mentality. For example, if you take the Israeli government, for example, the Palestinian people within the walls of, I guess, the Israeli state, they have different colored passport IDs and like different IDs for them, which allow them to access different areas of Israel or very specific areas of Israel, and versus them not even being able to access other areas at all, or even crossing over borders from the West Bank into Israel proper, or even from Gaza, has been more or less under blockade since 2017 or 2018.
How do they justify these groupings? Because I assume most people don't want to feel like they're the bad person, right? So no one's going to go out and say that these people should be treated differently from us.
That's kind of the main point of this, like, because like these people used to be neighbors to one another before the establishment of Israel and before the establishment of the Israeli state. These people used to be neighbors. They used to have they belonged to the same communities, they belonged to the same neighborhoods, they frequently interacted with each other, they went to the same schools, and they grew up with one another. And now there's been like a wedge force between these two groups, and over minor ideological differences which have amounted over time and also like been cemented over time through propaganda and through the rewriting of history of the Israeli people. These minor differences, which then were initially to begin with very minor, for example, religion it's a very basic, I guess, point of discrimination, you could say. For the most part, the people of Israel have very little indifference between them and the Palestinian people themselves. So they find certain differences, for example, the differences in religion, such as being either Jewish or being Muslim, then the propaganda narrows down on the divides between those religions versus the commonalities and versus the more community building points. So then
I mean,
that
yeah,
kind
we've
of
seen that with
yeah,
the Muslims and Hindus, right? For
exactly
the sake of
within.
partition as well.
Definitely. I mean, Pakistan was kind of established on this same founding of ideology that because of the differences of religion, like you had to separate and partition off a whole country. And these kind of things are, you don't initially like see them that way. Like they're like Hindus and Muslims celebrated Diwali and Eid with one another within most communities, versus now like we anything that has anything to do with Hindu culture, like for example Holi is like a huge, I guess, deal with our most educational institutions in Pakistan, that like if some university students end up doing like a color day or something like that, like it's seen as adoption of Hindu values, and then that's seen as bad. So like these outgrouping generation, this is how it kind of develops. You have like very small differences between two different groups, or a different interpretation of a social contract between these two groups, and then the propaganda aims to narrow down on those differences and separate them into two different groups. This then generates the side that's generating the propaganda then generates an us versus them kind of mentality, that it's either they have to go or we have to like leave from there. In that generation and in that gap, you find that a lot of times like the people who are being targeted are usually minorities of said group. Like for example, the Muslims of India are now also facing huge amounts of backlash due to the Hindutva movement and due to Hindu nationalist movements, that like due to the differences in religion and differences in interpretation of their social contract. For example, you could take eating beef. Like for example, Hindus find that to be a very abhorrent act, and versus in Muslim culture it's not seen as that not much of a problem. So
it's a yummy act.
It's a yummy act. In that situation, you have these very minor differences, and now you have like cow vigilantes roaming around the countryside in India who are arresting and also taking justice into their own hands and brutally
lynching in some cases.
Lynching people in some cases, and brutalizing Muslims for eating beef. When you see like propaganda being generated in that direction, the Pakistani issue of, for example, forcing out the Afghan refugees from Pakistan, which is also seen as a huge humanitarian disaster, because you're forcing at least around, I guess, 1.7 million people to evacuate the country. And considering the sheer numbers scale, you can see that Israel is forcibly forcing people out of Gaza, which is around the population around 2 million people as well, to evacuate from the region of Gaza. So like this is the kind of parallel narratives that I'm trying to pull here. In the understanding that the Pakistani officials have kind of said that the Afghan refugees are like just living, they're social welfare queens living off of Pakistani social welfare. They're stealing jobs, they're dealing drugs, participating in terrorism. Like they're the main, you could say, they're saying that these people are the main draw from TTP, which the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which they're recruiting from these Afghan refugees, which is an absurd point to make. I'm sorry. Like one thing, they left Afghanistan because of the Taliban threat back in 1971 during the whole, I guess, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and also the following Afghanistan wars which took place due to American exceptionalism. They left Afghanistan to come to Pakistan in order to resettle their lives and become contributing parts of society, but they've never been allowed to do so because minor differences of the fact that you were born across a couple of kilometers across the border made it that you were somehow different from the people who were living a couple of kilometers on this side of the border.
And we just accept this so easily. Like, where's the data that shows it's Afghan refugees who are doing all this at a disproportional rate?
Exactly, 100%. I mean, there is no data to back this up, that like Afghan refugees are like disproportionately contributing to terrorism, or they're disproportionately contributing to drug dealing, which is happening there. So
not even an elected government that's making these decisions.
Exactly. That's what makes all of this even more heinous to begin with. That like you don't even have a proper government sitting here, and now they're like calling all the shots in this situation. Like another line of discrimination which is kind of drawn here, like I'll pull up a video over here. Like these people are they've been settled here for the past 30 to 40 years. They've had children who are now Pakistani-born citizens, and just the fact that they have Afghan refugee papers on their record, they're now being deported from Pakistan. Like, I'll let the videos kind of speak for itself here in them.
recent weeks, police have been going door to door, rounding people up. Registered Afghans should be exempt, but in Islamabad, even those with ID cards have been targeted. Sir Gul showed us the room.
Like, even people who have ID cards are being targeted and forced to leave their own country. Like, imagine if you were a Pakistani citizen, you have a national ID card, and they're saying now that you have to kind of leave and go back to wherever you came from, or they're deporting you back to India because you had ties to India, for example. Like, it makes no sense in that category. Like, you've been living here for decades now. You've established a life here. And now, like, even like the actions that the Pakistani government is kind of taking towards these refugees is absolutely insane. I mean, you've seen over time, like, over the past, I guess, couple of months now, the level of destruction that the Israeli government leveled against the people of Gaza. Like, you can see very similar parallels being drawn here. Like, I'll let the video play for it.
This entire Afghan settlement was razed to the ground to try and force them
God.
out.
अभी भी अगर वहाँ पे हम चले जाए तो ज़ाहिर बात है हमारा दुश्मन सारा तालिबान में वो तो हमारे को वहीं पर कत्ल कर देगा.
Like, he's saying right now that, like, I think the caption might not be big enough to read on the screen, but he's saying right now that, like, we left from Afghanistan to escape the Taliban. Like, all of our enemies, quote unquote, live there now, and they've taken control of the government. So if you send us back now in this moment, we're going to be like, you're sending us back in the hands of the very people who we tried to run away from. And even now, like, you can see on the other side of the border, there's a huge refugee camp set up, and a lot of the people are food insecure and they're dying from starvation, hunger, and communicable diseases. And even when they were shifted from Afghanistan to here, like, I have first-hand experience of witnessing this, that there were UNICEF camps set outside of Peshawar for Afghan refugees, and the conditions were absolutely horrible for them. They never allowed them to fully reintegrate into society, allow them to be considered Pakistani citizens, and that kind of stigma kind of stuck with them ever since, like, their refugee status was enacted back in the 70s or 80s. So, like, this is
Look
the
at
kind
comments. Look at the comments under the video. How this
how can
guy,
the Taliban complain?
How can the Taliban complain?
They're
They are
Afghans.
Afghans. Well done, Pakistan, for your robust removal.
UK should be taking
taking
lessons from you. Fucking hell, man.
Oh my God. I mean, we're truly living in the best of times.
Is Rishi watching? Pakistan demonstrating how you deal with illegal immigrants. Like,
Yeah.
as you see, all of these Afghan refugees, like, they're saying that they're going to be deported back to their own enemies, you could say. They have been resident in Pakistan for so long, they fled from the Afghan Taliban and they came here, and now they're going to send them back to their enemies' own hands. The Pakistani government has kind of claimed that these people are the main source of economic instability, and also the terrorist activity, and so there's an understanding that why would these people who have fled from the Taliban functionally join up with TTP over in Pakistan at this point? It seems like a very long stretch of logic, you could say. So in that understanding, we can kind of pivot over to the actual reasoning behind why we're deporting all of these hundreds of thousands of refugees. And that's kind of like in a tit for tat kind of situation with the Afghan Taliban, who have taken power back in Afghanistan. When they took control back in 2021, the nudge, wink, wink understanding that the Pakistani government kind of had with the Afghan Taliban and supporting them over the years throughout the American occupation was that afterwards they will deal with the insurgent organizations within Pakistan, functioning within Pakistan itself, like the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which are a branch of, you could say, the Afghan Taliban. So they said, after regaining control, you'll take back these people, like, you'll tell them to quiet down, right? And that wasn't really the case. So in that situation, when the Afghan Taliban did not agree to deal with the Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which are operating within Pakistan's borders, the Pakistani government said, okay, sure, we understand that you're economically unstable at this moment. We're just going to throw an extra 1 million refugees at you. And in this situation, you can see that the Afghan refugees are kind of being treated as political pawns to just spite another country or spite another government.
By a non-elected government.
By a non-elected government. I mean, this is all like all of these things that we are saying right now within the Pakistan's borders. I would like to caveat that this is a non-elected government. We're currently underneath a caretaker government, which has gone buck wild and passing whatever the fuck it wants. This does not reflect, I guess, the will of the Pakistani people, you could say, in that sense. So in this situation, you have propaganda generation, which is using to outgroup another group, and it's being used to their true motives are being hidden behind propaganda, you could say. There was like a poll pulled up by, I guess, Checkout Analytics. I'm not sure to the degree of their veracity in their polls and stuff, but with a grain of salt always. There's an overwhelming majority that supports the exportation of these people versus the people who are saying that no, this is constitutionally wrong. You're deporting people who have a passport, who have an identification, who are born in Pakistan, because being born in Pakistan constitutionally gives you a citizenship to the country. We're having blatant violations of the constitution to expel these people over very minor differences. So this is how propaganda generation ball gets kind of rolling for propaganda generation. The outgroup is kind of focused in on, they're blamed for greater systemic failings. Usually a larger state or the larger demographic of the country tries to point at these people as scapegoats. Like minorities within Pakistan have kind of been blamed for other things as well. And also the propaganda is usually always tied with political failings or economic failings. So you can very much see within the borders of Pakistan that takeover by the caretaker government, Pakistan has kind of fallen on hard economic times, and then during that time you have a higher rise in propaganda to try and cover for the shortcomings of the government. And usually like these groups are scapegoated in that situation so that like the government itself doesn't take blame for its economic failings.
Muslims in India, immigrants in the US, Afghan refugees in Pakistan, religious minorities in Pakistan.
I mean, definitely 100%. Anyone is on the chopping board once the propaganda machine gets moving. It's just a matter of when you're going to be on the chopping board. Because, for example, like you can see,
not me.
For example, you can see if you want an external example of how propaganda kind of operates, like you can take a look at Israeli propaganda. Like they have a whole culture of, I guess, Hasbara, or in Hebrew it kind of literally means explanation, in which it kind of justifies the abhorrent actions its government takes against the Palestinian people. For example, they claim that the Hamas is using the people of Gaza as human shields, where, for example, they have tunnels underneath local civilian structures, which are then promptly bombed out because they're hiding Hamas. You can see that like there's a generalized, I guess, pink washing of the Israeli army as well, in claiming that if Hamas was allowed to take over Israel, they would end up massacring all of the gay people of Israel, which is a wild take, to be honest, because throughout history, if you kind of take a look at the Palestinian people, you find that a lot of them are very left-leaning, very secular-leaning, and they have historically supported gender identity rights and also having different sexual rights as well. So
yeah, the occupier always has this problem of projecting. They justify their own violence by some perceived threat of future violence by the other group. If they took power, they would do what we're doing to them.
Exactly.
So we need to completely eradicate them. Which
yeah,
is just
I mean,
insane logic.
It is insane, like wild piece of logic to latch onto, because like you understand that you're going to preemptively nuke someone off the face of the planet just because they're going to preemptively nuke you off the face of the planet if they manage to somehow gain control, which is not really the case.
It's like that person who says, if there's anarchy, then everyone will be fucking everyone. No one will be able to control themselves. Whereas most normal people never think that. But It's the person
Exactly.
who wants to do that who thinks that.
Exactly, like 100% in that situation, because there's also like the example that, like, you know how Israel is kind of the most ethical army on the face of the planet. Like, this is also another point of Hasbara propaganda that they kind of put out, that we preemptively inform people that we're going to bomb your building. Well, in the first place, your question should be that, like, why are you bombing a civilian building to begin with? Like, the example that I kind of want to bring up in this situation is, like, for example, if there's a hostage situation, right? And in that hostage situation, there's one gunman and he has like a whole school held hostage, you could say. The solution is not to blow up the entire school in that situation to get rid of the gunmen, right? This is where Hasbara, like, propaganda kind of tends to fall apart, especially with the disproportionate response that Israel kind of gives to responses that Hamas has given to them. For example, the total death toll, I think, in the October 7th attacks, the initial figure was 400. Yeah, I remember that, but it stands at around 11 or 1200. The loss of life in that situation is deplorable in all manners. Like, it is absolutely abhorrent that innocent people had to lose their lives in that way. But the thing is that your response to that situation should not be that you have to level Gaza to the ground and in the process kill 20,000 civilians, and also now enforce people to be having their limbs amputated due to the bombings without anesthesia, and also cutting off all aid and all supply to the Gaza Strip. It's understandable that, you know, like, if there is a call and response kind of situation that kind of happens in state politics, but the response given by the Israeli government is completely in disproportion to it could have possibly done. But like, now they're trying to focusing down the scope and move to the quote unquote final solution for Gaza, which is its complete eradication and the removal of all the people who live there. So that's how kind of the whole propaganda apparatus of the Israeli government kind of operates, and it's kind of transparent to see now that, like, you know, they're talking out of their asses. So you've seen how Israeli propaganda aims to justify its unjustifiable actions by making explanations through extended, like, leaps of logic, you could say. In a similar situation, you could see in Pakistan that, for example, with the Baloch protests which are currently going on against the enforced disappearances of the Baloch people, their figurehead kind of in that situation is Mahrang Baloch, who has, in current state media, has been accused of having connections with the Balochistan Liberation Army. I have like a Sama News article pulled up over here. They said, why is Mahrang Baloch silent on the actions of the militants of the BLA? And in this, they say that her father was a commander in the BLA, which is an absolute fabrication in that situation. But you can see how over time discrimination is kind of being generated using these propaganda mechanisms. The aim of propaganda is kind of to throw everything at the wall, and a couple of things will kind of slip through your bullshit detectors in that situation. And when those things, a couple of things slip through, you kind of accept them as fact. So in that situation, you kind of become unaware of the fact that it's propaganda to begin with. With the Balochistan situation, you can see that a very nice parallel that can be drawn to it is the separation and independence movement of East Pakistan into Bangladesh nowadays. For example, during that time, when there was an increasing movement for independence of Bangladesh and for the freedom of the Bengali people, there was an independent movement, or a movement for independence, which kind of arose from the masses over there, because they were kind of ostracized from the political autonomy that they didn't have at the time. And the discrimination generation is kind of focused in further, like the propaganda kind of even focuses in further. It'll remove the people who it's targeting from levers of autonomy, you could say. Like, laws are drafted up so that they have less and less power in the more central committees of the government, and also like slowly over time erodes their political and independent autonomy. With the independence movement in Bangladesh, for example, West Pakistan had an overwhelming majority in the day-to-day runnings of Bangladesh, and in order to kind of clamp down on this independence movement, which was kind of burgeoning in East Pakistan, West Pakistan then launched Operation Searchlight, which involved the gathering up of all activists, all intellectuals, and and even also like the militia who was kind of operating within East Pakistan to kind of move towards their own independence. You can see a similar case kind of arising in Balochistan nowadays, since they've been politically kind of ostracized from the central government, because they have very little say in how their province is run, because it's always been seen as a stepchild province of the state of Pakistan, with the highest rates of poverty, highest rates of illiteracy, having a huge amount of resources present there which are extracted by the central government in Punjab and also Sindh, which then gain the benefits of the vast resources which are available there and then funnel them to the imperial core. And in a similar situation, you can see that Balochistan, then when you finally have these people kind of, after years of political oppression in this regard, you can see them as eventually being sick and tired of it. I mean, like, it's understandable that being oppressed for so long, eventually you're going to lash out against the state. And in that situation, your freedom movement, or like your voice of the people is going to be maligned by the state, by its narratives, in order to counteract the impact that you're kind of having, or like the activism that you're bringing, or like when you're trying to shift eyes over to the plight of your people.
Seems like a well-oiled machine at this point.
I mean, it's definitely is a well-oiled machine. Like, you have the whole government. When you have a whole government that's kind of operating against you and your best interests, I mean, at a certain point, you're going to be fed up with it, right? And when you lash back at them, they're gonna, on top of that, say that you're acting like as an insurgent in that situation. Members of for example, Balochistan national and separatist and leftist movements have been the target of the state, enforcibly disappeared by the Pakistani state. And over time, finally, when this kettle boils over, you're going to have a movement such as the Baloch protests, which are currently happening in Islamabad right now. And the media and everyone else around us is kind of taking a hook, line, and sinker that these people are insurgents and they're not to be trusted. Meanwhile, when they're exercising their own liberties, you could say, and their own rights for the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression, in order to try and fight and find their own political autonomy in the government of Pakistan. So in the next step that kind of happens is that ostracization is complete. In this situation, the people that you are targeting, they no longer have any political autonomy. They're also considered to be pariahs of society, and also they've been socially and politically removed to such an extent that anything that kind of happens with them, you're kind of indifferent to whatever happens. For example, with the Afghan refugees, with the Baloch people, and also you could see that with the people of Gaza, for example. They've been completely dehumanized and they've been completely politically ostracized from whatever action they can take for their own liberation or for their own autonomy. And then when that kind of happens, the state kind of shifts its lens over to the next people in line, who could be another possible minority or another possible immigrant group or another possible outgrouping. So over time, successively, you can see that the scope of the in-group kind of grows smaller and smaller and smaller. And for example, like at first you had Pakistanis only with the Afghan refugees, and now you have only Punjabis and Sindhis with the Baloch people. And then from there, you can have even more smaller and smaller groups. And for example, you could even have like anti-Christian sentiment, and also anti-Hindu sentiment towards our own minorities who kind of live here. And for example, that's been very much politically leveraged in a lot of cases of using Muslim national identity within Pakistan to kind of focus in on outgroupings such as Pakistani Hindus and also Pakistani Christians, which are kind of seen as lesser versus other people.
And I imagine at every step, the violence needed to repeat these processes also intensifies.
Definitely.
As the in-group grows smaller.
You're 100% right on this case. And like Israel, you could kind of see has reached this final position where it's excluded all of the people who were originally living there, then and limiting it only to themselves. Then even from within that in-group, you even have a further in-group of, for example, white Jewish people. For example, Ethiopian Jews, who have claimed that they should be able to be residents of Israel. They've been historically, you could say, earmarked and said that like their justification is not good enough and not allowing them to return to their land, so to say.
Yeah, didn't they also sterilize
Exactly. Yeah.
non-white Jewish people who wanted to come to Israel?
Exactly. Like, this is the double standard that the Israeli government is kind of setting up. For example, they would allow all Ukrainian Jewish people to like leave from the country of Ukraine with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but they won't allow Ethiopian Jews who are kind of be facing oppression and genocide within their own countries to flee to Israel, but just because of them being a different race. And over time, you can see that as this in-group kind of shrinks over time, you can very quickly find yourself on the other side of this in-group. So this is like the kind of main, I guess, point I wanted to kind of arrive at, that minorities and all the people who are usually ethnically marginalized, who are politically marginalized, economically marginalized, all of these people are canaries in the coal mine, you could say, of your own civil liberties and rights which are available within your state. Because if you don't protect their rights, they have the same rights as you do, and over time you're going to find that your own rights are being taken away from you.
That is very true.
Talking about moving on to, I guess, more and more concentric circles and in groups. At first you had, I guess, of the Afghan people you were talking, as we mentioned earlier before. Now then you had the Baloch people, and now you have like the difference between Muslim and Shia movement, like very closely coming up on the chopping block next, with the Pakistan and Iran situation, which kind of blown up overnight, quite literally, with Iran launching strikes at Pakistan within Balochistan, and then in return Pakistan launching strikes back in Iran. And very soon you're going to start hearing narratives from mainstream media and from the state stating that like Shias are the next people who are going to be like marginalized and removed from the society, you could say.
Yeah, you already see posts saying that all the Shias in Pakistan should be deported to Iran after what Iran did.
Exactly, 100%. I mean, like, this is exactly what's going to happen next, because the thing about all of these people who are being ostracized and being minimalized and being sent off to the borders of society and not being allowed to voice their own opinions is that usually most of the time, probably 100% of the time, these people usually have narratives which differ from the state narrative.
That narrative being, please don't kill us. Let us live.
I mean, not even that. Like, I mean, just like the degree of violence which is being inflicted upon them is, I guess, probably like a good marker for that. Because like in certain situations, you can see that with, for example, the Afghan refugees, you can see that they've never been treated very nicely from the government, and the degree of their plight is only to be viewed from their experiences. And when you deny them that action, you could say, and listen to only state narratives of their plight, you don't fully understand like what they kind of had to go through on a day-to-day basis. And for example, even though Baloch people with their own enforced disappearances, you can see that the degree of, I guess, brutality that the government has kind of inflicted on these people, you don't get to hear those stories from the state versus like the straight from the horse's mouth in that situation. Like, one thing I also wanted to further go into, like, we've talked about propaganda and all of these things so long, how would one be susceptible to propaganda and state narratives, be falling prey to these gaps, you could say, in our understanding?
I don't know, I'm built different. I never fall for this stuff.
I mean, everyone likes to think that they're like built different, or they're like, you know, I like to think critically about all things, and I don't like to believe anything that anyone says, or I'm skeptical of everything. But the thing is, with propaganda, it's kind of like advertisement. It's like no one's immune to it. It's just that the right propaganda or the right advertisement hasn't found you yet. And in that situation,
I don't know, couldn't be me.
Like in that situation, you can even see, like, you know, like eventually you're going to fall for the McDonald's ad, right? In the same situation, you're going to eventually fall for some kind of propaganda which someone is pumping out and trying to politically motivate you against some other group. So in that situation, we kind of wanted to narrow down into what kind of makes you more vulnerable to being exploited by propaganda. And in that situation, I would probably say that being disconnected from your own history or the history of your own country is a huge, I guess, marker for this. Because not understanding your own history, not understanding your own roots, properly in the proper and the truest possible light, you could say, leaves gaps in that story that you kind of tell to yourself. It leaves it open for propaganda to seep in and to rewrite that history. For example, you can take with Israelis writing overwriting their own histories with the Nakba. They said that the Palestinians kind of left on their own accord due to pressuring from us, versus the absolute atrocities which are kind of committed in order to an event kind of like the Nakba to take place. And also, for example, you can take with India, and for right now currently with the BJP being the lead party over there in the Hindutva movement, is like scrubbing their history books of all the Mughal history, which kind of was present throughout India's very long history. And Pakistan kind of rewriting with its own rewriting of the Bengali genocide which took place. So in these gaps in history, like of your own history and on the understanding of your own history, like you can find that other narratives and other people who are external to yourself, they kind of fill in those gaps with whatever they deem fit to suit their own interests. Do you want to fill in? Kuch bhi Bastika?
I'm listening.
Point.
It's a depressing episode.
This was a very depressing episode in that regard, but like another, I guess, point would be ideological alignment, understanding where your own ideology kind of aligns, and if it aligns with the power structures around you and your government, you should understand that you are very prone to being propagandized too. Because when you're aligned with the power structures of your government, you're going to listen to whatever the government is saying and justifying in its own actions in that regard. For example, like with the Baloch people who are living within Punjab, within the borders of Punjab, they're kind of aligned with whatever the government is saying right now. Their own political and economic interests are in that direction. Without the exploitation of Balochistan, we won't have natural gas for us to burn in our homes in Punjab. And without Balochistan, we won't have the vast mineral resources that we sell on a regular basis from Sindh. So these kind of ideological alignments with your government, with the power structures that kind of surround you, leave you open to being propagandized too, because they give you their narrative, which then essentially aligns with your own ideology and understanding of the world. And then you kind of give them free rein to justify whatever they want to do. And I guess the main source of all of this be having an ideological void, which is, I guess, Pakistan's main source of contention, you could say. Like, this is a problem that's been brought up many times by numerous people, and we're probably going to do an episode on this further. But having an ideological void leaves it open to be filled with whatever ideology and another party wants to fill it with. Let me first break it down for a second. What am I talking about when I speak of an ideological void? An ideological void is kind of the story that you tell yourself about how your country came to be, how your country kind of operates. It's the story that a whole nation kind of comes together and tells itself that, like, you know, we're supposed to be this XYZ way, or we're supposed to be ABC kind of way. It's like the kind of
We're a Muslim country, we're a Hindu
exactly
country,
like
Jewish country,
exactly
we're
like
a communist country.
Like, these are the kind of ideologies which are kind of found in a certain country when it's kind of comes into formation. And with Pakistan, you can explicitly see that, like, we kind of have our founding ideology of we are a Muslim nation, and we were predominantly Muslims who wanted to be separate from the Hindus, and that's why we wanted our own homeland, because we understood that if we stayed in that situation, we would be unsafe to practice our own religion in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if there's evidence that comes forward, I don't know how that would happen, that we would be safe and would have been better off the other way, then the entire reason for existence of the state comes into question.
Exactly. Like, when you leave a ideological gap like that, that's when you begin to question state narratives. For example, like, there's this brilliant article by Nadeem Farooq Paracha on foundational myths, and he compares Pakistan, India, and Israel in their foundational myths, how their myth making kind of contradicts with actual history. So within the 70s and 80s, when being communist and being leftist was seen as being really cool, you had a huge amount of historians starting to re-examine their own history books and understanding that, you know, what lies were told during our inception that have now become foundational myths in our understanding of why our country exists and what things are actually true and what actually happened. So with, for example, the idea of Israel, you could say that like the whole story behind the foundation of Israel, that Jewish people were historically present within like 3,000 years ago. Like they take a lot from their own scriptures and the Torah, and they say that we have a right to this land in that situation, and anyone else who's living on that land has no right to live there. For example, the common saying that they had a rallying call around to was, with a land without people for a people without a land. And over time, like Marxists and Leninists and historians from Israel re-examined that and understood the amount of brutalization and that the government had to kind of inflict to make the state of Israel to happen. And in the same situation, you can see now in India and also in Pakistan that they're now shifting their ideological founding myths towards their own religious narratives in that situation, that India is supposed to be a land for Hindu people and Pakistan is supposed to be a land for predominantly Muslim people.
Speaking of land without a people, there's this funny story. I was listening to Shahid Khaqan Abbasi's interview on another podcast. And I don't know how it came up, but the host said that isn't the construction of Islamabad as well a settler colonial project by the Punjabis because it was built on stolen land.
Exactly.
And he's like, what do you mean? It was worthless land that wasn't valued at anything, and now look how expensive the property values are there.
I mean, this is exactly what happened. What has to happen. There's never a land without people in it. I mean, we are probably the most widespread species on the face of this planet. Anywhere you're going to build anything, someone is going to be living there beforehand, and no matter how ethically you kind of take it off of their hands, there's going to be like shortcomings in that situation.
Yeah, it's easy to see these contradictions in people we don't like, but it's hard to point them out when it's happening right in front of us.
Exactly, and when it's happening in front of us, to the people who are around us and to us and ourselves, it's kind of hard to see the water that's around you by being a fish in it. Like you can't see the air that's around you currently right now. It's kind of become transparent to you. So ideas and ideologies becoming transparent to you, that's the opportunity when propaganda kind of takes hold, and it's now becoming a concept that kind of defines your own personal identity. And then that's why when a lot of people, when they start reinvestigating their roots or trying to re-understand their history and how it actually kind of happened, in that situation, there's always going to be a degree of uneasiness, you could say. I mean, it's always a very difficult thing to kind of confront that you've been told lies for the vast majority of your life.
Part of creating propaganda is to make it the air people breathe.
Exactly.
So if you grow up all your life hearing that we won 61 and 71 and 99 wars, then I mean, when someone challenges you on that, they're attacking your personal identity.
Exactly, 100%. Like, I mean, in this same, I guess, article, in 1985, The Murder of History by K.K. Aziz was published. And that kind of examined the whole ideology that Pakistan was founded on an Islamic basis. And it kind of brought challenge to that. And for that reason, he was kind of silenced and the book was banned across the board. And also in a similar situation, a lot of the books and education that we receive from the government and also from private institutions even slant a very heavy direction towards the state in being right and how they were the righteous actors in that situation. So when you're trying to re-examine your history and re-understand how propaganda operates, which we've tried to do hopefully clearly in this episode, you could probably be more well informed and better armed, I guess would be the word in this situation, hopefully, from our podcast to kind of deal with propaganda. And since obviously the world is always on fire and people are always going to blame other people for why that fire is burning. So that has been our episode on politics of oppression, and specifically, I guess, with the focus lens on propaganda. Hopefully we'll try and continue this series and probably pick up another topic. For example, I guess the next nearest topic that comes to mind is probably nationalism and how nationalism kind of contributes towards the politics of oppression. Sorry, this has been a bit of a downer episode. Considering all the events that have been unfolding for the past couple of months, this I thought was more pertinent towards the understanding of our world.
I'm saying I'm sorry we had to ruin the amazing time you're all
Yeah.
having consuming the media and the news.
Sorry for making news more borderline unbearable from this point onwards, because now you'll understand it for being the propaganda that it actually is. And
Trust no one. Don't even trust yourself. Any thoughts you have, just push them out. It's all propaganda.
party on the edge of the abyss, bros. Because I'm going to try and spin this in the right direction. Hold up. Every day that you stand on the edge of the abyss, looking into the darkness, understand that it's the everyday people who kind of force humanity back from the edge. And it's the people themselves who are kind of the main players in all of this. All of the political leaders, all of these people are accountable to us. We have to make sure that they fully understand that agreement. So, as always, this has been the Q&A podcast. Yes, shoot.
There's nothing we can say that anti-government hasn't said.
Exactly. So this has been the Q&A podcast. Hopefully we'll catch you again next week with a new episode. Allah Hafiz.
Bye.